karanasan mo po, di na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
Sa karanasan mo po, di na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators and journalists called to defend press freedom.
Ever since news broke of a 10 billion peso scam involving certain individuals and some 20 reportedly bogus non-government organizations, many have come to question the practice of NGOs, government offices, and elected officials and the importance of the pork barrel. People all over have cried for the abolishment of the pork barrel as this has become the source of corruption for many, while some simply want more transparency from the government. And there are others who have opted to appeal to the better nature of the persons involved in the scandal. Should the pork barrel be abolished, or should it be more strictly implemented? How are legitimate NGOs affected by this scandal, and what are they proposing to minimize or eliminate this kind of practice from happening again? Good evening. You are watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno, sitting in for Jing Macasaet. Joining me tonight is Mr. Sixto Donato Macasaet, Executive Director of Code NGO, or Caucus of Development NGO Networks. Good evening, and thank you for being with us tonight, Mr. Macasaet.
Good evening, Karen. Thank you for inviting us.
So the word NGO is usually a common term. I mean, a lot of people hear about this or read it in the newspapers. But given the recent 10 billion peso pork barrel scam, a lot of people are now more curious. What are NGOs? How does it really work? So perhaps your NGO would be a good way to look at NGOs. What does Code NGO do?
Well, Code NGO, Karen, is a network of, actually we're a network of networks of NGOs.
So it's just an umbrella
It's an
NGO.
umbrella. We have 12 member networks. 6 of them are national networks and 6 are regional networks. And we have around 1,600 base organizations, we call them, or local organizations under the 12.
So 1,600 all other NGOs around the Philippines.
Around the
That's
Philippines.
very huge. And how many years has Code NGO been around?
Actually, we celebrated our 20th year last year. We were founded in 1991, in December 1991. So we've been in existence for the past, well, counting now, 22 years.
22 years. That's a long time to be around. No? Are there any mga siguro for people to identify with Code NGO or any of your NGOs? Can you name any more visible NGOs under your umbrella?
Well, we have a network of cooperatives. It's called the National Confederation of Cooperatives, or NATCO. We also have one of the networks is the Association of Foundations, which is a network of corporate foundations, family foundations, and community foundations. And then, well, PBSP is also part of the Code, and the Philippine Business for Social Progress is also part of the Code NGO network.
So can you give us examples of specific projects that you have been involved in the past? I mean, any of your 1,600 NGOs?
Actually, it's because of the number. We've been involved in different programs for the farmers, for fisherfolk, for students. One of our networks, actually the oldest among our members, is the National Council for Social Development, which is a network of NGOs working with children. So they run orphanages, they run street children centers, they have daycare centers for children.
So the advocacies are really varied. You have fishermen, pwede rin mga kids.
Yeah, and then urban poor.
Urban poor.
We have NGOs working with the urban poor, helping in securing the land for those who don't have security of tenure over the land, and then also helping them build houses.
Okay. So, of course, when you talk about NGOs, you don't really run for profit. And so the question would be, how do you fund these projects? And I guess this is a good opportunity for us to talk about what is the involvement of for instance, getting funding from pork barrels?
Well, historically, NGOs in the Philippines have really relied more on donations, both locally from individuals or from other foundations. So there are what we call grant-making foundations that provide funds for operating what we call operating NGOs. Then we've also had foreign funding from foreign organizations, either government or non-government organizations, also from other countries. And actually, our experience is that government funding provides only a small part of the needs of the NGO
This is,
sector.
you're talking about local government funding.
Yeah,
They
local
only
government
provide
funding.
Is this a conscious?
Even actually foreign government funding. There have been
Okay.
significant foreign funding, but more from also NGOs in other countries.
So it's really more private funding.
yeah.
Is this a conscious decision to get more funding from private individuals or entities rather than government?
I guess that's how it developed really because non-government the sector nga is non-government. So they've really run to also non-government funds for support. And for many of us actually, especially during the martial law period, for many NGOs, it was really, in a sense, unthinkable to get funding from government.
Unthinkable.
At that
Why
time.
do you say unthinkable?
Well, because many NGOs actually were put up to, where we're not. Let's just say they were not supportive of the martial law government.
Okay. So it was more of they were not, I guess, in agreement with the type of government.
Yeah.
But even with the current, when you still said na up to now, most of your funding comes from private individuals or entities. Is there a hesitation to get funding from government?
Actually, generally there's still a hesitation. There's more openness compared to the past, but there's still hesitation. And I think the hesitation comes from, well, one, generally most NGOs shy away from, politics and...
Why is that?
Although we also, for example, for Code NGO, we also try to convince our members to be more active in the non-partisan, the political non-partisan. But most NGOs, because they see, like most Filipinos, I guess they see politics as dirty and complicated.
And do you find that to be parang a disadvantage kung kunwari one of your NGOs is linked specifically to government funding? Is there some negative publicity associated with that?
Well, one of the cherished values of NGOs is being independent from government. So there's always a hesitance and a fear that it will compromise the independence of NGOs if they are funded by government. But let me also say that we've also been saying to government in the recent past, because government has actually been calling on NGOs to be more active in governance, to monitor projects, road projects, the conditional cash transfer program. So they've been calling for NGOs to volunteer in doing all of this. Many NGOs are saying that we can volunteer, but there's also a limit to what we can do with the resources that we have. So if you want us to be more active, you also have to provide funding for at least some.
Usually it's
So
more of the
there's-
government reaching out to the NGOs to participate.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that government ends up funding when they participate, just as a consequence of that participation.
Or as we also say it's a necessary, because
because you have to fund
yeah.
for you to participate, no?
And the reality also now is compared, for example, to 20 years ago when we were quite popular with foreign donors, because at that time it was just after martial law and people wanted to help the new government under Cory Aquino at that time. At this time, we're no longer seen by many foreign countries as a prime source, as a prime candidate for funding, because they see us as having economically developed already compared to
other poorer developing
poorer
countries.
areas.
Okay. Now that we're talking about perception, you mentioned, of course, yung foreign funding with respect to the Philippines. That's foreign perception. Pero with the current pork barrel scam, has this affected Code NGO, or would you know if this has also affected all other types of NGOs?
We have not yet actually seen actual effects, but we know that for many of the people that we talk to now, that there's a perception. Although we know that that media is quite careful in saying that these are fake NGOs, but in the end, what remains for some, or maybe for many people, is the word NGO, and they say,
Yes.
oh, NGO, kasama naman palang NGO,
Oo.
NGO dyan.
And do you think that's unfair na malilink yung mga legitimate NGOs, like for instance, Code NGO, you've been around for 22 years, compared to these recent or other NGOs that cropped up recently just for the scam? Do you think that this might affect legitimate NGOs in terms of getting funding, this type of pork barrel scam?
That's actually our fear now, that because of this, there will be, people will be more hesitant to fund NGOs. And we actually know that some government officials, some people who we've talked to in government, are also getting more hesitant to fund, because, especially if it's government funding, then they're afraid that it may be lumped together with the pork barrel scandal.
You mean ang hesitation also comes from
some
government officials as well, to be linked to
So parang
funding?
parang mahirap kasi, so parang dahil baka masuspecha nga na NGO kayo, tapos even if it's not pork barrel funds, even if it's other types of funding, there's more hesitation now, because especially at this time when it's very much prominent in the news.
Okay. When we were discussing earlier yung mga off-camera, yung mga initiatives ng Code NGO, you mentioned the PDAF Watch. What's this about?
Well, we initiated PDAF is the Priority Development Assistance Fund, which is the formal name of the Pork Barrel Fund. So we initiated that watch actually in 2006.
So that's been, that's already 7 years.
Yeah, because actually there have been several pork barrel scandals in the recent, not even many years ago. As early as I remember, as early as during the time of President Ramos, there was already a big scandal then also.
Also relating to pork barrel.
Yeah, they called it differently then. They called it the Countrywide Development Fund. And we were joking that because of the scandal, they made a change. They changed the name
To project.
from CDF.
Para mawala yung...
CDF kasi na parang...
Para mawala yung badge na...
ng dishonor ng CDF. They changed the name to Priority Development Assistance Fund, but it remained basically the same. So there have been cases like this before. So we started PDAF Watch in 2006 to try to help prevent cases like this. So we studied where the pork barrel funds were going to. We randomly sampled some of the projects and monitored how they were being actually implemented.
So based on this PDAF Watch, did you discover any flaws in the system that would basically lead to a scam like the recent pork barrel scam?
Well, one basic finding that we had then, and which is I think is applicable up to now, is the lack of information of most people about the pork barrel. I mean, very few people really knew that each senator had, well, at that time around 40 million.
40 million.
Sorry. Each congressperson had 40 million, and each senator had at that time 120 million pesos.
120 million pesos.
Per year. And now it's 70 and 200 million. So very few people knew about it. They did not know how they were being spent or how they were being used. And when we asked the congresspersons and the senators, because part of the watch was asking them to make available information on how they were using the funds, very few of the legislators provided us information. During the first round in 2006, we were able to get information from the DBM. So that was why we were also able to monitor some of the projects. When we repeated the exercise that in 2009, and we followed up DBM for several months, we never got any data from
Okay.
DBM.
So hold that thought, Mr. Macasaet. I want to ask more about information on pork barrels and, of course, the role of NGOs. Let's take a short break. News Cafe will return after these reminders. Oo. You're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel, and we are still joined by our guest, Executive Director Sixto Macasaet of the Code NGO. Good evening, sir. Before the break, we were talking about yung PDAF initiative nyo dati, PDAF Watch, which basically, in that case, you asked for information on how legislators were using their pork barrel. And you mentioned then na sometimes the information was not provided to you. Actually, in most cases,
In most cases.
Yes.
Almost all cases.
In almost all cases. So, now with this PDAF Watch, do you still continue your advocacy under this initiative?
We're still, actually we've just formulated a new set of recommendations given nga itong the recent pork barrel scandal. And one of the highlights there is really to make the process and the list of projects, including partner NGOs, if any, transparent to the public. So posted in websites, reported to the local development councils in the districts, and so on.
So this is your recommendation, that they should make this information available?
Well, we have it's among our recommendations.
Do you think the Freedom of Information Act or that bill, Freedom of Information Bill, will help in terms of complying with these recommendations?
Actually, we joined Code NGO joined the Right to Know Right Now coalition in filing people's initiative to get the FOI, the Freedom of Information Act bill, hopefully approved by this Congress. And we think it will make a big difference. Even now, malinaw naman, once we get information about the pork barrel out, then you get people saying na, hindi namin natanggap yan, pineke lang yung pirma namin, and so on. So, kung nakatago yan, then we'll never know.
You mentioned that you started the PDAF Watch 2006 pa. This is in the previous administrations. Do you see any difference in terms of approach and transparency between the previous administrations and the current administration, especially since the current administration seems to have as its main advocacy yung transparency and accountability of the government? Do you feel the difference?
Well, yeah, definitely, at least as far as, particularly as far as the DBM is concerned. I said earlier, we wrote to the DBM, we visited their office, we called them in 2009 to early 2010 to get information about the PDAF. We never got any information from them. Right after June 30, 2010, one of the first initiatives of DBM was to make the releases of funds for the pork barrel available on their website. So if you check the DBM website now, you can get a list of all the fund releases under PDAF.
Ah, that's great. So if people want to check, saan ba napunta yung mga PDAF? Then they can really see this online. That's the DBM. This is referred to specific senators or congressmen.
Yes.
You can see that information.
Although we also said to one of the undersecretaries recently that when we check the website, some of the descriptions of the project, some are very specific, which is good. You know, they say it's a farm to market road in this barangay, and it's the length is this much, this long. But for some, it's very general. Like there are projects that we just say that 50 million from a senator is given to nationwide assistance to projects nationwide. No, the senator is there.
Okay.
The government agency is there, but it just says livelihood projects nationwide. So that's very hard to monitor.
Can you ask for additional information in
Yes,
that
yes,
case?
you can.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting so far is that NGOs like you, legitimate NGOs who've been around for 22 years, like Code NGO, actually get very little funding from the government. You get it mostly from private individuals and entities. And in spite of initiatives like the PDAF Watch, there's still this 10 billion peso pork barrel scam that came out. So my question would be, in your opinion, do you think it's still necessary to have a pork barrel or this type of system? Or can we do away with this and still have NGOs like Code NGO function very well in the country?
Well, as I told you, Karen, earlier, we have 1,600 organizations. And when we've been talking about the PDAF, actually not just now, but even then, because we had our PDAF watch, and we've always had a mixture of recommendations on whether to abolish it or not to. But one thing that I think we're all agreed on is that while it's, so some are saying let's abolish it, some let's say let's just make improvements. But one thing that we all agree on is that while it's there, we have to make significant improvements in terms of how the transparency and on how it's used, also how it is linked to local development projects. Because, in a funny or unfortunate way, although the congresspersons are supposed to represent particular districts with particular municipalities, and each municipality has its own development plan, and now government is requiring them to have their own poverty reduction action plan. Many of the projects funded by PDAF are not linked to the
Particular district
local
of a
development
congressman,
plans. It's really discretionary and, in a sense, arbitrary on the part of. So we're saying it has to be linked
So
to the
currently,
local.
under the current system, congressmen can basically fund projects outside of their district.
Well, yeah, but although that really happens, but what really happens is that it has no connection at all to what the municipalities are planning or what in terms of their development, the local because each municipality and city has its own local development plan for 3 years, and now has a poverty reduction action plan. There's no, and oftentimes those plans include projects that don't have funds because many municipalities have limited funds, so they source it out, try to raise funds for it, and then the congressman has the PDAF, but it's not linked to. Oftentimes, it's not linked to this
To the
local
development plan. So, ano yung nagiging, who makes up for the difference then? Do NGOs usually step in?
Usually, they go unfunded, and then they repeat it in the next development plan because it's not yet implemented.
Yeah, so paano nangyayari? It's in the plan, hindi may implement because walang funding.
It's subject to
So,
availability of
where do the
funds.
funds go then, usually? Pagka ganyan, it's because they're being diverted to other projects?
Or to their own pet projects, which are not necessarily
linked to what their municipality is focused on. Okay.
And well, clearly it's also linked to patronage. I mean, what in a sense, what makes their leaders or supporters happy? So it goes to support for
specific projects
indigent patients, or to medicines, or to even in the past to fill health cards.
And do NGOs usually try to fill in this gap? Meaning, pag nakikita nila na may kakulungan in one municipality na hindi nababantayan ng local government nila or their specific
Actually, yun
congressmen.
naman yung yun naman yung isa sa mga dahilan din kung ba't marami nabubuong NGO is really to fill in the gaps that yung hindi nagagawa ng gobyerno, may pangangailangan, and then people come together and try to fill in that need, di ba? Whether it's in education or health or.
So speaking of needs, so what are the current projects or major projects of Code NGO or your 1,600 NGOs around the country?
Yung kasi our own networks have their own particular focus. So we have a network that's focused on we have field rice focus, for example, on agrarian reform and rural development. So they're focusing on sustainable agriculture, helping farmers develop the land and grow organic
That's great.
products.
I love organic. So is this a nationwide initiative?
They have members nationwide. We have another network, PhilSA, that works with the urban poor, with the community mortgage program and other programs to help the urban poor get decent housing and other social services. As I said, we have a network of cooperatives that promote savings and credit for people. Code NGO itself, as a combination of all of this, we've been focusing on participatory local governance, basically training people on the ground in the municipalities to be more active citizens so that they engage their local governments. They participate in the planning process, the budgeting process, to make sure that the local funds, the local development plans are attuned to the needs of the poor people.
Okay, that's good to know that continuously you have a lot of projects. And I guess my other question would be, now given the current pork barrel scam, will Code NGO change its approach? Meaning, would you lessen your dependence on funding from the government? Considering before, very little na nga lang yung kinukuha nyo from the government, liliitan nyo pa ba to?
Well, particularly sa PDAP, although as you said, maliit naman talaga na yan. Particularly for PDAP, it will be, of course, more hesitant, more cautious because nga of all of this, of all these problems related to, well, actually we always say, not genuine NGOs, but fake NGOs that are involved in this.
Okay. And is there any initiative on the part of NGOs like you to try to help get rid of fake NGOs para hindi ma-affect yung mga NGOs that really do good, those that really fill in the gaps, yung mga may kulang na initiatives? And have you talked among yourselves kung paano nyo i-address yung mga fake NGOs?
Ang unang difficulty that we confront always is that there are actually thousands and thousands of NGOs. When we look at, there are 4 government agencies that provide legal personality to NGOs. So yung tawag nila primary registration. Securities and Exchange Commission, Cooperative Development Authority, Department of Labor, tsaka Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board. For various types, depende sa kung anong klase kang NGO, you go to these 4. When we look at their registration, they have, as of a few months ago, 180,000 registered organizations. So yun lang yung registered, and marami pa rin yung mga unregistered. Pero let's just talk about the registered, 180,000. So it's a big challenge really how to ensure that all of these are running well and
monitored,
and
may
doing
accountability.
So what we've done, actually we've done this with other groups, is put up the Philippine Council for NGO Certification. This was put up in 2008. So meron yung third-party parang evaluation. So it's run by NGOs, but it's recognized by DOF, the Department of Finance. And it's, ang sistema is they have standards, and merong, pag magpapa-certify sa NGO, merong evaluation team that goes to the NGO to check. And also to help them meet the standards.
But that's good to know that there's initiatives on how to address yung mga fake NGOs para hindi naman mabahiran yung mga illegitimate
Ang isa din
NGOs.
sinasabi namin sa gobyerno lagi, pwede ba i-centralize nyo yung database ninyo? Kasi wala kang makikita
that would be good,
centralized database on all of these NGOs.
Oo. I hope you can succeed in making sure na we keep the integrity of all the legitimate NGOs like Code NGO. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank my guest, Executive Director Sixto Macasaet of the Code NGO, for being with us tonight. Join us again next Thursday for another round of discussion right here on News Cafe. I'm Attorney Karen Jimeno sitting in for Jing Magsaysay. Good night.
Sa karoon sa report, tingnan pa natin sa lahat.